For showing up. Today we're here for Lawtrades Legal Freelancer Bootcamp, how to work in billable hours. I am Matt Margolis. I'm our head of community at Lawtrades. If you don't know Lawtrades is, I guess the best way to put it is a legal tech company that helps build out legal infrastructure for law firms and for busy legal departments, providing flexible legal talent on demand. I have with me, I'm so happy she's here, but we have Megan today, who is the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Fivetran. Thank you, Megan, for showing up for this awesome event.
Of course, I'm excited. And you described exactly what we are, which is a busy legal department. And while we've used Lawtrades in the past and been super happy, I'm really excited to be here with you because although you and I are not Destiny's Child, bills, we will do our best rendition.
You're the best. That's all I can say. That was awesome. So for a little bit of background, both Megan and I are very familiar with bills, whether billing ourselves or reviewing, approving, or cutting bills. So we thought this would be an awesome event for freelance attorneys and other attorneys watching in to kind of get more insight on the best ways to bill, what to do, and what not to do. So with that being said, this is us. What not to do.
Yeah, back to us, decidedly not Destiny's Child, unfortunately.
I wish. I don't have the singing voice for it.
We called something like, litigation's future. I don't know.
I do all these TikToks. I've just realized I'm not as creative as you. And now I got to get back to the drawing board. Lawtrades may hire you as head of community, just a heads up. So after this, we'll talk. So what not to do, we'll start with that. Billing vague entries. Let's start with that. And that's probably the bane of my existence. Megan, I would assume it's the bane of your existence.
I am happy to pay for any and everything when I know what I'm paying for because I am so excited to have the extra hands on board. Like we have way more legal work to do that could ever be possibly done by all the people on our current team and more. And so I love to pay for things when I know what they are. If I can't read it and understand exactly what it is you worked on or what we got out of it, that's going to be a really hard bill to pay.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I was in-house, this example is actually a true example. I did receive this. I received a 1.2 hours review document production. I saw this and I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know what kind of document production this was. I didn't know where the document production came from, why they were reviewing the document production. And this was presented on my desk. And for me, a busy general counsel, just like you, Megan, it's hard to make heads or tails of this. And why am I paying for this? So do not bill something like this.
And we used Lawtrades a lot, Lawtrades professionals and really, amazing kind of members of our team for commercial contract work because that volume of sales agreements, it's like, I hope we have more than we can handle because that means we're having a really good end of month, end of quarter. What I love is when folks bill and they put the deal that they worked on, right? It's one thing to say attention to MSA. It's another thing to say work on XYZ company deal. You don't have to get into the weeds. It doesn't have to be specific to, worked on the privacy provision for 20 minutes, then shifted to liability cap for another, 15 minutes. But the vague entry, don't do it. Just throw in that company name, throw in that potential customer name. It makes the person paying the bill even more excited and attaching that business outcome of that new, customer contract to what that legal bill is.
I couldn't agree more. So the next what not to do, and this actually is probably more the bane of my existence, is block billing. So this is, if you don't know what block billing is, folks watching, block billing are these big fat entries that are literally like 4.6 here, but it could be, I'll share this war story after, but 10 hours and it's a number of entries and it drives, first off, it drives me crazy. It drives a number of in-house folks, whether you're a legal ops professional reviewing bills, a paralegal, or an AGC, DGC, or GC, drives us nuts. And this is a good example. So 4.6, draft an LPA, conference with the client, and then a conference with the opposing counsel. And then I summarized the discussion, and then I prepared email correspondence, and then I reviewed it, et cetera, et cetera. And it drives us nuts. I guess I'll say first is it drives us nuts because I don't know what each entry is for. Was the draft the LPA? Was that 6 hours? Was that 3 hours? Was the teleconference an hour? Was it 2 hours? If it's 2 hours, why is it only 2 hours? So This is a no. This is an
Is it fair
absolute.
to say that this hits you like a ton of bricks, Matt?
It hits me like a
Like
ton
a
of
ton of
bricks.
blocks?
Yes, it does hit me like a ton of.
The only way this entry looks like it could be worse is if it was combined with that first one we talked about, vague billing, where I've seen from really top-notch, amazing firms, 10 hours billed in a row, attention to transaction documents. Well, I'm sure you worked really hard on them. Attention to transaction documents for a 10-hour big block bill doesn't tell me much.
No. I had once had a litigation matter where a firm, it was a fantastic firm, but I guess they were just accustomed to billing like this. And I had come in, I had inherited the firm relationship. And I remember receiving my first invoice. It was for like $50,000. And it was literally big chunks, like 6 hours, 10 hours. I did get a 10-hour entry, like what you're describing. And it was these big chunks, and I almost lost it. So in a litigation sense, if I wanted to maybe recover those fees later, the judge is going to look at those bills and say the same thing that I said. What was this? What did you bill for this? I don't understand. How is this possibly reasonable? And I just remember getting on the phone with my outside counsel, the nicest people. And I'm like, guys, you're going to have to redo the whole invoice. And they're like, are you sure? I'm like, oh, I'm not just sure, I'm positive. Because you're right, I just got hit with a ton of blocks.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
And it takes that extra time to really put into more specifics and break out your bills. But I can promise, like having been on the other side as someone billing, it's so much easier to do in the moment while everything is fresh. Or even if it's like that next week later when you're doing your time entry, like take that extra 45 seconds to a minute and a half, break everything up. Because when someone, comes back to you 2 months later with an email asking for clarity, oh, I dread those emails. You have to basically become a forensic accountant, which is why we became lawyers, because we're the one people more interesting than accountants possibly. And so don't unintentionally make yourself into a forensic accountant because you didn't take that extra effort right at the start.
Are we more interesting than accountants though?
Well, some would say, and some would be, the legal team that we work with, in my company, we love our accountants, but friendly rivalry for sure.
That's fair. So the next thing, this is another issue that I used to see in private practice a lot. I used to see it on guidelines. I used to see it, and then when I was in-house, I used to see it getting billed, is administrative tasks. So when you're working as an attorney, a paralegal, legal ops professional, contract manager, what have you, there are certain tasks that you do. I think the perfect example is printing. This particular one, I have vivid, horrible memories as a first-year associate, printing and organizing internal litigation binders, stacked very high. Those things, generally speaking, are not billable. And I think it's definitely, I would say potentially a case-by-case basis what administrative is, but generally speaking, right, printing out documents, you can't bill for waiting on your printer. You can't bill for the printer. You can't bill for, granted, there may be some exceptions where a client may say, okay, certain printing costs, I think insurance is a good example. Insurance companies will pay for it, but the client is paying you for what you're providing as a lawyer, as a paralegal, as a legal ops person, as a contract manager, not as an Office Depot.
And I would even add to that, Matt, which is unless you're doing massive litigation, any printing work that you're doing that actually has to show up on a bill, get a new printer. It's taken too long. It really should be under 0.1. And if you're engaging as sort of a Lawtrades professional and you're doing tasks for busy corporate legal departments, that printing cost, wrap it into everything else you're doing. Because I hope that printing is a 6-minute thing that's just like, let's get this across the finish line. I know for some legal teams, when you need that extra support of just like, hey, I need someone to just tackle this project. I don't care what else is included in it, whether it's like a little bit of administrative work and just sending out the DocuSigns. I love when people will just get the full project over the hump to completion, but that requires a really clear conversation in advance to make sure you know what your client is okay with. Hey, do you want me to just get this done and like GSD, get shit done through the roof? Or do you want me to like hand you the legal analysis and you will take it to the next phase?
I couldn't agree more. This actually, I'm triggering myself. I remember a time, Megan, do you remember like dictation with the little
fax machine? Oh yeah, dictation. Let's go there.
Right. So with the little, oh my gosh, cassettes. And I remember working for an attorney that would bill for transcribing the dictation. Or he would bill for, I'm trying to remember this exactly, but it was either transcribing the dictation or just like certain aspects of the dictation, right? That generally speaking were strictly administrative. And it used to drive all the other partners at the firm crazy because they're like, we can't bill for this. Every time you bill for this, I'm slashing the bill and it's going away, because if a client saw that, they may not be a client anymore.
Yeah. And I think a more modern, example of administrative tasks for some clients is even research. There's some type of legal research that's really required to solve problems, to address a litigation need, to understand current, terms that are being used out in the market. But if it's general research and you need to do 2 hours of sort of internet research about a subject for which you're weighing in on, don't do more than an hour or so before you go check in with the client and say, hey, I want to generally get up to speed on all of these topics in employment law so I can do a great job updating your handbook. Well, that could be seen as administrative tasks to the project at hand, because the project at hand is really outcome-based employee handbook. We don't need to do a full, boil the ocean on what every state is doing.
That is a really great point. And I probably used to see that more than anything, especially with the litigated matters, where I would have folks billing me for a motion to dismiss. And in the motion to dismiss, they were grounds that were incredibly simple. I didn't attach the contract. Looking up case law for not attaching the contract, and that's why it was dismissed. And that's a fair point, where billing excessively for things of that nature is not the right call. If it is, again, it's a conversation which we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, but it's a conversation to be had with the client saying, hey, I know this looks like it's an administrative task technically, but I need this because of X, Y, and Z. But
or do you want me to take it to the next level and do a couple more hours to see what we can get on this one narrow area that I am thinking about digging into? Get that conversation done out front. Don't bill more than that hour of research, even though it may seem like it's a legal task. A lot of clients will view that as fairly administrative.
And we've already gotten a question on this topic. You know what? I'll jump into it as we're going, but we just received a question. I always thought it would be annoying to check in with clients on those kinds of things. How often do you like your contractors to check in with you? Megan, do you want to tackle it?
Somewhere between all the time and never. Is the right answer, right? I mean, oh gosh, the lawyerly answer is it depends. It depends on the project and what the scoping is. And that's why, and we'll get into this, I think, later in the presentation, those conversations early and often when you're first working with a new team, a new manager, a new in-house department, those conversations are helpful because you want to understand, is their mindset set it and forget it, and you are the easy bake oven solution to all of their problems? Or is their mindset more, hey, this is an area that I feel super pride of ownership on. I want to check back constantly until I feel like we're in a place of trust. And judging which kind of mindset your client is taking can be really hard. And if you don't know, always feel free to ask, hey, do you want me to just handle this? And even though I may not be doing it the same way you've done it in the past, do you want me to just sort of get this going? Or, hey, do you want me to check in every so often? I think when you're not sure, erring on the side of checking in is always better. I personally we've had some amazing Lawtrades folks that we've worked with where they'll check in often. Sometimes I may not get back to them because I'm, totally immersed in something else, and they'll just keep plugging along anyways. My lack of response doesn't stop the project. Man, that
sure.
is
I think that's fair. For me, I had I think it's the same point. It depends. I used to have vendors, outside counsel that had my cell phone and they would text me. We would be friendly. They'd say, hey, Matt, I'm about to bill for XYZ. I just want you to be aware because it may take 5 hours. And I thought it was going to take 3, but it's going to take 5. I just want you to be aware. I understand, you're very cautious on the budget. So I would, and that was fine. I appreciated that because they knew that was a better move, maybe bugging me, on a Wednesday afternoon as opposed to, on a Friday afternoon when I got the invoice and I'm like, guys, what happened here? So I am also in the air of, more is better than less. That being said, obviously you don't want to bug a very busy GC. There's plenty of us that work for, or have worked for solo GCs that don't have a lot of time. So I would say, if possible, if you're in that scenario where a solo GC is reviewing the bills and they're just very busy, maybe once a week you send an email saying, hey, heads up, this is the update. This is what the budget's looking like. These are some issues that may come up in terms of billing. I just wanted you to be aware of it. If you want to discuss it, we can have a call at a later date, or we can call now. And leaving that open for that solo GC or solo shop or a close to solo shop. So they can have that conversation without having, without constant phone calls. So that would be my advice there.
Matt, you're living inside a very nice little attic in my head of all my favorite things about Lawtrades. Seriously, though, my favorite feature of Lawtrades, I think, is the weekly summaries of bills that we get. And this might be skipping ahead of like what not to do. Don't wait until the last minute to bill.
Yeah.
The coolest product part of Lawtrades for me is that I get these weekly email summaries. Hey, you're trending this project, this person is, a couple $1,000s, couple $100. That gives me a sense of both where we are in the project and where we are in the budget, because some projects could be black holes of money pits. We can keep going on and on and on, but really as sort of the GC or the bill reviewer, I want to make sure we're right sizing how much money we're spending for the size of the problem. The weekly summary emails are the best way I do it. And waiting to the last minute to bill retroactively for your whole month at hand takes away my coolest part of Lawtrades. So please don't make me sad.
I can't wait to get to that portion of this presentation about the waiting till the end of the year. There's an accounting person there's multiple accounting folks at law firms that if they're watching this would probably just like scoff at me because I was the worst, but we'll get to that. So the next what not to do is paralegal versus legal tasks. I'm going to add to it. It's paralegal versus legal ops versus contract manager. So I will start and say this. You have been hired, right? Let's say you just got hired. You've been hired as a paralegal, as an attorney, legal ops person, and I'll add to this, it's not on here, but contract management person. You have a specific scope of work. You are doing a certain thing. And as an attorney, you are doing tasks that are generally different than a legal ops person, a paralegal, a contract manager. Be cognizant of what you're billing for. You shouldn't be billing for necessarily paralegal tasks if you're an attorney. I think litigation is probably the best example of that. As a litigator and as an attorney, I would never bill for, and I couldn't bill for certain paralegal tasks, which would be like cover letters, which would be notices of appearance, which would be potentially very routine copy-paste motions, or even potentially, depending on the client, discovery, some kinds of basic discovery. That's something you should be cognizant of. And that's also something which we're going to talk about later, but having a clear line of communication with your client saying, hey, I'm an attorney, I'm going to be billing for this because maybe I don't have a paralegal, I don't have a legal assistant, but I'm going to be billing for that. Is that okay or is that not okay? Likewise for a paralegal, doing certain attorney tasks, obviously that kind of goes without saying. If you're a paralegal, you're likely not doing attorney tasks, so you wouldn't be billing for such. And as a legal ops person, you're doing more of the operations side, so you wouldn't be doing necessarily those other things. So it's a little bit more applicable to the attorney to paralegal, but still very, 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 very important.
The graphic says it all for me.
It's the greatest. This is great, but then the best one is the new one where it's like the 3 Spider-Men. It's like the Tobey Maguire, the Tom Holland, and the Andrew Garfield. That's near and dear to my heart. So let me get to, honestly, the slide I've been waiting to get to. Don't wait until the last minute to bill. I like this slide because I am the absolute worst. And when I was in private practice, I remember getting phone calls from, let's see, my media partner, my managing partner, my head of accounting. Gosh, who else called me at one point?
You got on the shit list, Matt.
Oh yeah, a senior attorney called me once. I remember my paralegal was like, "Hey Matt, is your time in?" And I'm like, "Why?" They're like, "Because it's July 1st." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." Okay, and then when I went in-house, which is to Megan's point, which I think she's going to address here, is it was horrible finding out at the very end two things. One, you could tell when someone bills at the end of the month. You could see the bill because someone is looking at emails, they're looking at documents that they produced, and they're basically recreating what their billing should look like. And as a in-house attorney, I would look at these bills at the very end of the month, and I'm like, wish I knew about this sooner. Wish I knew about this sooner. Especially for Lawtrades, where we're starting to roll out the earlier bills. It's a lifesaver for big projects that when you find out maybe we're 100 hours as opposed to 10 hours may change your perspective on the project and the whole plan. And Meg, not to steal what you were about to say, so I'll lead it to you on this point.
No, I mean, you're triggering me for one of like the worst projects I worked on with an outside provider, which was, we had talked about scoping a certain budget to do a project, and that budget was for the, full project, start to finish, like product is in my hand and we can publish it and go out to the world and have people sign it. Well, imagine my surprise when like we're checking in on bills. I haven't heard anything. End of the month comes. Suddenly, this person's blown through the whole budget for the entire project, and I haven't even seen a rough draft, let alone a final product, right? Like that is the worst feeling. And I love knowing if there's things happening while they're happening. I hate being surprised in ways that I'm not going to like being surprised, right? It's all about expectation management at the end of the day. And one of the best ways you can set expectations and make sure there aren't any bad surprises is like being really on top of bills when you can and getting them in. And, we have been on the other side, Matt and I was a serial offender too. I was being chased. I remember even my last day at my law firm, I was there till I think 1 a.m. filling out my timesheets for that mid-month of like before I left so they could still bill for my ghost of what I had done, right? And so I get it. It is the last thing you want to do at the end of the day. I personally just want to like close the laptop, go take a walk. But it's kind of, back to our earlier conversation, like 2 to 5 to even 12 minutes in the moment is going to save you a 2-hour heartache session of putting in your time later at the end of the month.
You remind me of a story actually to that point. So I had a vendor. I love that I can share all my war stories on this. So I had a vendor who did not give me any updates on the bills. It was all at the end. It was a transaction, right? So you just throw it on the closing statement. I remember getting the bill and it was like my budget was X and the bill was like X times X times X. And I almost had a heart attack. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me sooner? And it was, I think one, it was twofold. It was one, the bill was so outrageous, they felt afraid to reach out and say something, which is a huge problem. But two, I think all the bills came in at the end because they didn't have there was no thought of like, I don't have to bill monthly or even in 15-day increments because it's just going at the very end. And billing at the very end and surprising someone with a bill when we all have budgets, that blows the budget completely away is the worst thing ever. And it was, needless to say, it was not a fun conversation. Actually, it wasn't a fun multiple conversations. And I will actually never forget that for the rest of my life.
You being on the inside, like it's tempting to think, oh gosh, like people on in-house are going to complain about the bill no matter what it is. Like, no, I hate asking questions about it. I hate poking holes in bills because it feels like, I'm back to my 21-year-old self trying to get into a cool club that I'm not in the list for. That is like, I don't want to have a conversation with anyone about the bill. And sometimes I have to because it's so confusing, egregious, late, over budget that I feel like I can't perform my duty to the company, to my boss, the CEO, unless I poke around and ask some more questions. So don't make me feel like I'm standing outside the velvet rope. I don't like knocking on that door.
That's an awesome analogy. I'm going to start using that. I don't want to get it. Same point. I remember, I had certain vendors that the bills, we had such a relationship at one point where I knew the bills were perfect. Just knew it. And they were always perfect. And I'm going to get into what to do. And they followed all the what to do. And it was stellar. And I never questioned a thing. I never had to. And it made my life easier. It made my CEO's life easier. It made the vendor's life easier. It was great. So on that note, so what to do? So different than the being vague, let's talk about detail. This seems egregious, but this is exactly how I used to bill. And I never got questioned. I never had any issue with it. And it made everyone happy. So 1.2, and now analyze, well, it should be analysis. See, granted, I didn't have Grammarly on while doing this. That's another issue for a different kinds of PowerPoint. But analysis of limited partnership agreement, various internal correspondence brought by the client, and meeting notes prepared contemporaneous with client meeting on whatever date for purpose. This is the most important part for me. For purposes of preparing amended and restated limited partnership agreement. When we're looking at bills, I need to know the who, the what, and the why. I need to know exactly those things. And those are the questions you should ask yourself. What am I doing? Who am I doing it for? What is the purpose, right? Super, super important. I actually start all of my bills, or I would start all my bills. I'm no longer practicing, but when I would start my bills, it would always have no matter what, for purposes of, and then I would put a blank. We need to know why you're doing something. You need to be doing tasks that are pushing the ball forward to the goal. We need to make sure we're getting somewhere. And that's what we want to see in entries. If I see analyze documents, period, I'm going to lose my mind, right? So it would be, it's something that I have to see that I know. I'm like, why am I paying for this attorney? I think that's the best way to put it. Why am I paying for this attorney? Well, I'm paying for them because they're going to be doing X, Y, and Z for purposes of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And I talked about this a little bit, but if you're somebody who is supporting a sales organization or a customer service organization or sort of a partnerships where there is real money and there's real customers sitting behind the client's engagement with you, throw in the customer name of what you worked on. Worked on MSA for Citibank, whoever it was, right? Like put in that customer name because it allows the client to draw an immediate connection between your work and monetary value. And that is the best thing you can hope for because it really shows that you like proof is in the pudding. We cannot live without this person. Here's how we got to this customer. Here's how we got to yes. I love seeing customer names or agreement names or agreement kind of connections in those commercial contracting bills. Could also be for vendor agreements, right? You're doing vendor agreements and if there's a really big gnarly one, and usually you should say vendor review, half an hour here, 20 minutes there. You're working on a gnarly one that takes an hour and a half. Let me know that was the AWS one, which doesn't accept negotiations or whatever it was, right? And I love that there's a specificness about which customer you've been working on. Similarly, if someone's engaged you to work on a project that's cross-functional, it happens all the time at startups, right? There's like some gnarly problem. We need extra legal support, but we need you to talk to somebody else in the business as well. Make it really clear whose direction you were taking when you were billing something. And even before you bill it at somebody else's direction, other than somebody in the legal team, make sure you got sign off from your client of like, hey, I'm going to work with finance, HR, whoever it is. And, if they want me to do some extra, do you want me to take my lead from them? Do you want me to come back to you first before I go ahead and do that work? Some teams who don't work with lawyers as often are kind of, amazed by the concept of the billable hour. It's brand new for them and it's all butterflies and roses. And, when we're in the trenches, billable hours are not butterflies and roses. They're things that are really valuable. They're gold bricks that we're stacking. And there is something that we have to pay for at the end of the day. So we're usually a little bit tighter on exactly what we want in the direction.
The best analogies during this whole thing. I'm stealing every single one of them. And I couldn't agree more as well. When I would see in these bills like XYZ, that's actually a really good point. When I would do a transaction, right, it would say like XYZ conversation relating to same with finance. I could reach out to finance. Well, first one, that's comforting to know that they're speaking with finance. That's what the bill is relating to. I remember this conversation. I could speak to finance and be like, hey, if I had to, which I don't question my vendors like this, but hey, how long did that meeting go? Finance can confirm it. Finance can confirm that. It helps me out as well. And that's fantastic. So I'm going to be a little bit quicker on this one because I think we all understand it. The next one, which is billing each as a separate entry. And this is how you defeat the block bill, right? Very simple. Just slice and dice with obviously this kind of detail. So I won't speak a little bit, I won't speak more to this, but this is really how you do it. So
my general rule of thumb is if it's more than 3 or 4 hours, that's too much. You really shouldn't be billing 3 to 4 hours at a time unless it's like an exception to the rule. Those are tasks that could be broken out.
That was something that I was drilled in private practice. If it was like, I remember that if I had billed like 4 hours, if I had built something for 4 hours, someone would look and say, that doesn't make sense. How can one task take 4 hours? That just, it doesn't, logically speaking, it doesn't make sense. So
yeah, there's some sort of threshold between 3 and 4 where people will start to ask questions, and then C, i.e. velvet rope, no one wants to be there.
Preach. So the next thing is words are important. I'll have a bad example here. Look at documents. I look at that and I shudder because I've actually also received something like this. I think what did I get? No, it was like, look at contracts. I think that's what it was. And I got billed some amount of money for it.
Matt, do you think that's worse? Do you think look at contracts is worse, or attention to documents, or attention to contracts? Whenever I see attention to, I think, is that just a fancy way of saying you're whining and dining my contracts?
What is attention? I've never gotten attention to. You got an attention to?
Attention to. Mm-hmm.
Attention to is worse. Attention, at least looking means they're looking at it. Attention to is worse. Oh man. So I guess before we start, don't ever use attention to, because that already makes me shudder. So we are legal professionals, whether you're a paralegal, an attorney, a legal ops person, a contract manager. We are doing official things. You're not looking at documents, because you're not. Looking at documents implies that you're literally just page at your face and that's it. You're analyzing the documents. You're reviewing the documents. You're providing a substantive analysis of the documents. You're summarizing the documents. You're doing things of that nature. Words are important. If I saw look at documents or attention to documents, I'm never going to get that one out of my head. Attention to documents, I'm going to shudder and say, what did you do? That doesn't make any sense. I know it sounds crazy to say this, but words are important. Make sure you're conferring to the client in your bills exactly what you're doing, and what you're doing is worth the time they're spending. Folks, if you're billing $150, $250, $350, $450, $500 an hour, and you're telling someone you're just looking at documents, I question why I couldn't have gotten somebody else to do it who's not a paralegal, an attorney, a legal ops professional, or a contract manager. Gosh, attention to. I'm still shuddering from that. So my war stories, let's see if I have any more, because I feel like I have more on this. I've gotten some strange bills in my life, and I billed like this. When I was a first year associate, I remember billing. Actually, this is a combination. It was 10 hours. This is a true story. 10 hours, and it was review, document production. I think that's what it was. And I remember my managing partner at the time getting that bill and calling me into a meeting and saying, "Does this sound right?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know." And they said, "Well, it's not correct. You are an attorney, you're providing this service, and this is how we provide a service like this. We're not reviewing might even be a little soft. They're saying, we're not just reviewing the documents, we're doing something with the documents. And it's not 10 hours. We obviously broke it up, and that's kind of where the block billing comes into play. But they made it known, this is not what an attorney does. An attorney is going to be analyzing these documents to provide a substantive analysis in some sort of document format, so the client is aware of this, this, and this. That's what we're doing. So very important.
Yeah. And similarly, when I see attend meeting, attend call,
Yeah.
I don't love it. You're attending. Well, I think you're doing more than attending, because you've got this great brain, you've got this context, you're going to go do something with it. So if you really can't think of any other phrasing than attend XYZ call, add the purpose at the end of it. Like Matt shared in our earlier slide, attend call to prep for negotiation, attend call to understand deal dynamics. That really helps us at least feel a little bit better about that attendance.
I couldn't agree more. Did you just show up to, right, that's the thought. Did you just show up to the meeting and you just sat in, you muted it, you were on LinkedIn, maybe posting memes like me? I gotta know. Unless you are, listen, I bill for my memes. So maybe you're in a position like myself, which disregard the advice. But
Matt's memes are good though. I'd pay a very high hourly rate I would do it. A very high hourly rate for meme generation.
Oh my gosh. Don't. All right. After this, we're going to sign a contract. It'll work. It'll be perfect. I'll send you all the memes. So these next two slides are very, very important. Understand what your client wants. I think we've alluded to it at multiple slides and multiple parts of this presentation. This is so important. Understanding what your client wants. If you do not understand the task at hand, what you're looking for, your scope of work, you may be billing for something that the client has no intention of using, does not want, or you might be billing for something that, I guess the best way to put it is, you bill 10 hours for something that they thought took four hours, right? There needs to be this line of communication between yourself and the client, a full understanding, or else the relationship will sour.
Yeah. And that communication, I can't overemphasize how important that is. It doesn't matter if you're a legal ops, a paralegal, an admin assistant, an attorney. We talked about what is the right like cadence of communication with your client. Is it a lot? Is it a little? Well, regardless of what it is on an ongoing basis, at the beginning, it's always a lot because, Matt described a situation where the client thought it would take 4 hours and maybe you billed 10. That's not a great place to be, but it's recoverable. You know what a worse place to be is? It taking 10 hours and the client not even wanting it whatsoever. The client thinking, I wanted 0 hours on that. And so really understand upfront, okay, like what is the work product that you want? When do you want that work product? What steps do you think goes into making a great work product? What does success look like for this project or this, initiative that you want me to get into? Those 4 questions are really key because getting that right up front, it's going to be a breeze from then out. And I think what all of us want, whether you're on the client side or on the service provider side, we want is a long-standing relationship. Getting to know somebody and their quirks and their communication styles, building trust. Trust takes time. Once you've hit that trust equation, everything else unlocks. Your life is easier. Your bills don't get reviewed as much. The client feels really great and secure and feels like they don't have to give as much direction. And so going a little bit overboard on the communication and understanding the scope at the early stage is going to pay off dividends because then maybe you've got an ongoing client who you have regular, predictable hours with, and it's part of your portfolio.
Preach. I couldn't agree more. That's exactly my thoughts as well. It will save you so much time, energy, and a client. It could save you a client. It could be the scenario where you're right. I think I remember situations where as a litigator, I would bill for like a research project and I would find out later the client's like, I didn't want you to go in that direction. I don't care about that issue. I care about this issue. And I peeved a client that I didn't want to, get upset because this might be my best client. And it could have been rectified at the very beginning. Hey, I want to go and research in this direction. And they could have said no. And I'd be like, all right, fine, no worries. Keep moving on. The next thing that's important, and it has caveats. There are caveats to bill for everything you do. Now, that being said, I mean it in the sense of if you do a project and it takes 10 hours and you conveyed it to the client, or at least you've explained it and you've communicated with the client, then bill the 10 hours. Bill for everything you do in that sense, right? Things that are acceptable that you've discussed. Now, bill for everything you do does not mean, I think that you probably have stories as well, does not mean dinners on the client's dime, internal meetings that weren't authorized, things of that nature, which I've seen on bills. I'm sure you've seen them on bills.
I'm just thinking through a couple of them. The one thing that gets me the most that I see on bills, and this is where like that fine print caveat that I know you're going to have a terms of service in there somewhere, Matt, of like, click here to accept the caveats to this, there was going to be something in there that we had to all accept and say, yeah, I agree.
Yes,
but the one that I see pretty frequently is attend team meeting or attend social happy hour, attend virtual happy hour with the team. If we're working with you, we want to get to know you as a person too. And I don't really want you to bill for a social virtual happy hour, but I still want you to attend and I want you to want to attend, and not every time, but occasionally think of it as your own business development. Maybe you're a Lawtrades professional and you're working with Lawtrades and they do the bulk of the business development for you, but attending a team event every so often or hopping on for a team meeting just to say hi for 10 or 15 minutes, that goes a long way to that longer term relationship where you get to that place of trust more quickly and you get to that, regular recurring hours or projects that you're working on.
I agreed. I have a dinner story. I'll make it very quick. I had one that actually, this isn't my case. This is a famous case in Florida. A deposition transcript had come out where folks were discussing a bill, right? Someone was actually looking at an invoice, which was in dispute. And I remember it was like internal meeting discussing X, Y, and Z. And finally, the attorney had admitted and said, well, it wasn't really an internal meeting. It was lunch. I said, well, what do you mean? What about all these other internal meetings on the invoice? They were all lunch. Did you typically discuss cases at lunch? No, we usually
just whole grog good at lunch.
we just ate lunch. Maybe we talked about the Kardashians, but generally speaking, we ate lunch, and that's not billable. Now, that being said, back to the original thing here, as long as you have an open line of communication with your client, you explain, say, hey, I think it's going to take, or here, I'll give the perfect example. You're building a project that you discussed with your client and you thought it was going to take 5 hours. It's starting to look like it's going to take 10 hours. Call the client, give them a heads up. This goes back to your other slide. Call the client, give them a heads up and explain that it's probably going to take 10 hours. And at that point, you can bill your 10 hours. Don't realize something's going to take longer than it should. Not call the client, not tell them that this is going to happen, and then just cut your time. That's not the best move. That's not good for anybody, because then the client's not going to realize how much this task may ultimately cost in the future, right? You could forecast forward how much these kinds of tasks cost. Don't do that. Don't cut your time. Don't self-cut your time. Call the client, explain, and bill those hours.
Yeah. And likewise, in-house professionals, we want to get more efficient at what we do, especially if you're working with startups or high growth companies that are, prototypically building the plane as they're flying it. We don't have all of our systems figured out yet. You're probably doing more manual work than you'd like to do and that we'd like you to do. Put down that it took 0.6 hours to find and locate XYZ document on the system. That helps us know areas that we can get better in too, because that cost isn't necessarily your fault. It's something that we can get better at.
Perfect. I think, guys, that's it for our seminar. I did see one other question relating to detail. I think I'll address it very quickly. There is no such thing as too much detail. I put as much detail as I physically can. Granted, you don't want to overdo it. And I say you don't want to overdo it because you don't want to spend 25 hours putting in all of your time. Plus, you don't want 100 pages of invoices to your client where they've got a stack and they're like going through it. So I love detail. I guess being cognizant that maybe at a certain point you've given as much detail as you probably could do, but definitely err on more detail than less. Now,
go forth and bill.
Go forth and bill. Megan, thank you so much for showing up. I really appreciate it. Your insight was fantastic. Your analogies were the best I've ever heard anyone analogize.
But my memes were subpar, and you win on the memes, Matt, every time.
You stop. Flattery gets you nowhere, Megan. Hold on. Now, everyone watching, if you want, we have another event coming up. It's called our Innovator Series. It's going to be talking legal. I can't even speak today. We're going to be talking about legal and crypto with Drew Morris from TRM Labs. It's on June 16th. The link is to RSVP is in the chat. Now, everybody, thank you so much for showing up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us through LinkedIn or through email or whatever. Thanks again, guys.